Hello, I'm Dr. Brian Murray, Director of the Duke University Energy Initiative and a faculty member of Duke's Nicholas School of the Environment and Sanford School of Public Policy. For those who don't know, the Duke University Energy Initiative is Duke's interdisciplinary hub for all things energy related. We reach across business, engineering, environment, law, policy, and the arts and sciences at Duke to educate tomorrow's energy innovators, develop new solutions through research, and improve energy decisions by engaging business and government leaders. You can learn more about us and what we do at energy.duke.edu. In recent months, the Energy Initiative has conducted numerous webinars for stakeholders across the nation and world to explore critical energy issues together. Tonight's event explores a very important topic, advanced nuclear technology, and we are thrilled to have such distinguished experts for this discussion. This event was spearheaded by Dr. Eric Rohlfing, who joined Duke as an executive in residence last fall. Eric comes to us after a decades-long distinguished career at the Department of Energy and ARPA-E. You can see his full bio in the chat. Eric's insights and expertise have made him a valuable advisor to students and faculty alike. We are honored to have him here at Duke. And when he brought up the idea of hosting a conversation on the future of nuclear technology, we leapt at the opportunity. Now, Duke University has no nuclear engineering department, but it's plain to see that nuclear plays and may continue to play a critical role in our nation's energy profile in the drive toward decarbonization. We are delighted to host tonight's conversation. And with that, I'll pass it off to Eric.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm really delighted to host the conversation today about advanced nuclear energy technologies. Let me turn and introduce our two panelists now. Dr. Rachel Slaybaugh is an assistant professor of nuclear energy engineering at the University of California, Berkeley, where her research focuses on numerical methods for neutral particle transport with applications to reactor design, shielding, nuclear security, and non-proliferation. She's currently wrapping up a term as a program director at the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, ARPA-E, and the U.S. Department of Energy, where she's managed and launched innovative research programs to advance nuclear energy technologies. Jessica Lovering is completing her PhD in Engineering and Public Policy Department at Carnegie Mellon University, where she studies policies concerning commercial nuclear exports and models the economics of microreactors. She's also a non-resident fellow with the Energy for Growth Hub in Washington, D.C., where her work focuses on the potential role for advanced nuclear in emerging economies. More complete biographies for both Rachel and Jessica can be found in the chat. Now let me tell you what our plan is today. Our plan is to have a conversation, so this might not be a usual webinar where we're going to bombard you with PowerPoint slides. We want to have a conversation and we want to cover four major topics. First, we want to tell you what advanced nuclear is and how it differs from the current nuclear fleet. We want to tell you why it's of interest and why it could change the paradigm for how we think about nuclear energy. We want to talk a little bit about who is innovating, investing, and advocating these new technologies. And finally, we want to talk about barriers to how these technologies might be deployed in the future, especially in a decarbonized energy future. So as we know, nuclear energy provides more than half of America's carbon-free electricity. And so it's logical to expect that it might play a role in decarbonization in the future. But the existing fleet is aging, and plants will be retiring and they're not being replaced. And so there's a lot of research going on advanced nuclear. It holds great promise, but I'm old enough to remember many times talk of a nuclear renaissance. And so it's appropriate to be skeptical, I think. And so what we want to do today is explore what's going on in the research area and what could happen in advanced nuclear going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to tell us what we mean by advanced nuclear, how it differs from the current fleet, and what's exciting and innovative about it. Rachel?
Thanks, Eric. And we will mostly not be using PowerPoint slides today, but of course we will start with PowerPoint slides because it's not always super straightforward to understand some of these technologies. So I'm going to use some pictures to hopefully help. And is this in a configuration that everyone can see?
Yep.
Great. So real quick, what is nuclear energy? In a very basic sense, we take a uranium atom, usually uranium-235, We add a neutron of some energy, and then that uranium-235 atom splits into two pieces. And when that happens, a bunch of kinetic energy is released. And then that kinetic energy heats up some kind of heat transfer medium, and that's what we use to eventually create heat and turn a turbine and generate electricity. Why nuclear is interesting, can you see my mouse? Okay, is really well illustrated by XKCD. So if you burn sugar or coal or fat or gasoline, you get some amount, I believe this is in electron volts, of energy, and the energy density of uranium is significantly higher. So one fission creates a really large amount of energy, so you just need a lot less uranium compared to other combustible fuel sources. So traditional reactors, what do they look like? We take fuel and we make it into pellets, we make them into really long fuel rods, we put them inside a bucket of water, we cause fission to happen, the water gets heated up, eventually steam is created. The plants look about like this. These are cooling towers. The reactors are inside of here. They're pretty big. Traditionally, they're about a gigawatt electric. The ones that are built right now are called Generation 3, and the ones that are under construction are called Generation 3 Plus. I only point that out just in case you hear it. We refer to these in the industry as large light water reactors. One of the new technologies is a small modular light water reactor. So it's the same idea, but instead of 1 gigawatt size plant, it is several 50 or 60 megawatt plants. And so if you want a gigawatt type of installation, you would have a configuration like this where one of these little guys is 50 or 60 megawatts and you put like a 12 pack. And so they're all in the same pool together. So the idea here is that they're smaller, so you can factory manufacture them. They're easier to ship. Construction is simpler, but overall it's about the same technology. So a size comparison, this is one of the large light water reactors. This is one of these small modular reactors. Oops, sorry. So they're just, it's smaller. Another thing you might have heard about that is smaller yet is called a microreactor, and a microreactor is more like on the scale of a person. I mean, so these are 1 to 10 megawatts of electricity. They usually have a completely solid core. They have very different heat transfer mechanisms. They often use heat pipes. And the idea here is that you can fit into a really, with these 3 different products, you can fit into a large set of energy markets. Some other things you might hear about are molten salt reactors. That's where the heat transfer medium is a salt. There are different versions of that. There are also high temperature gas reactors where the heat transfer medium is a gas. And then there are also sodium fast reactors where the heat transfer medium is sodium. So those different coolant choices offer different levels of accident resistance, ability to reprocess fuel or recycle nuclear waste. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the overall idea was like, these are sort of the words that you will hear. People sometimes also call advanced reactors Generation 4 reactors.
Thanks, Rachel. The next topic I want to talk about, and I'll ask Jessica to respond to this, but feel free to jump in, Rachel, is the reason we want to do this, right, is that these type of reactors, these new designs have advantages over the old one. So one of the biggest problems with conventional, let's call it conventional nuclear reactors, Gen 3, Gen 3 plus, is cost, either in capital construction cost or in operating and maintenance cost. So Jessica, can you tell us how advanced reactors get at the challenge of construction cost and operating and maintenance costs?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Rachel, for that introduction. You covered some of this, but it really is a key driver of all of this research and development and innovations around advanced nuclear are mostly targeting ways to reduce the cost in different aspects. And one of the big differences that you maybe saw and Rachel touched on is size. So a lot of these advanced reactor designs, almost across the board, are much smaller. And that allows for just lower total capital cost, which is important when you have smaller utilities and liberal power markets, but also it allows you to move towards centralized fabrication or factory fabrication. And whether you do the whole thing, the whole reactor is built in a factory or components, and then you put them together later on site can dramatically reduce the costs. And there's also been lots of innovations to reduce potential operations and maintenance costs, improve fuel efficiency. But one thing that is important with a lot of these new technologies or advanced reactors is they're safer, but safer in a way that also reduces costs. And that's really important because we don't want to say that the existing nuclear fleet is not safe. It's very safe. But that safety is achieved in a lot of ways that are kind of costly and hard to manage in a cost-effective way. So they take a lot of people doing inspections and maintaining, proper protocols, and they take a lot of engineered systems and redundancy to maintain that safety. So it's different depending on the designs, whether it's salt-cooled or gas-cooled, but a lot of what's unique about advanced reactors is that they have features that we call passive safety or inherent safety. And what that means is that the safety comes from natural physical processes or intrinsic qualities with the design rather than engineered systems. So the reactors can be a lot simpler, sort of reducing the number of redundant systems that you need. A lot of the microreactor concepts kind of have minimal moving parts, which if any of your engineers, moving parts are always a challenge, both for long-term performance and also cost. So that's really the key that I want people to kind of wrap their heads around with advanced reactors is that a lot of innovations and new designs that allow for safety to be achieved while also lowering costs. And they do that through simplicity. And that's really a whole new paradigm around nuclear. And then also the other big one is factory fabrication. We've never really done nuclear in this way. And it opens up a lot of questions, but also a lot of exciting opportunities.
Thanks. You mentioned this, I think, in terms of the various scales and types of reactors offering more flexibility with respect to how they're used. Do either one of you want to say something about that with respect to, ramping ability or load following kind of thing, or just different markets that these new reactors might be more amenable to? We think of course, the gigawatt scale is big base load power. That's what it's all about. But these offer some different utilizations, right? So either one want to handle that one, Rachel?
Jessica, do you want me to talk about like temperature and ramping, and do you want to talk about markets? Okay.
Good.
So
we haven't planned this, as you can tell.
I didn't mention this. There are a lot of details to cover about advanced reactors, but some of them operate at different temperatures. So one of the things they can do is be available for industrial process heat. So the reactors that operate at 800 or 1,000 degrees Celsius, usually those are gas reactors, but not always. You could use the high temperature heat to partner with an industrial facility, and then they wouldn't need to be burning fossil fuels for their heat generation. A lot of these reactors, some of them can do what's called load following themselves, where they go up and down in power. A lot of them, especially with the higher temperatures, are also well suited to have combined thermal storage, where let's say you have a molten salt reactor, and then the molten salt holds heat really, really well. So you would have a secondary system of salt, and then you could keep your reactor on all the time, and the secondary system would go up and down. So these advanced reactors are much better suited than existing reactors to complement renewables. So you can keep existing reactors as baseload generation, and then you could install advanced reactors to balance out renewables, and you wouldn't need so much storage.
Yeah, that's perfect. And on the market side, so typically, as we said, a nuclear reactor is on the order of 1 gigawatt, and many sites have more than one reactor. So you're getting upwards of 2.5 gigawatts, which is very large. And only sort of the biggest electrical utilities can actually accommodate such a big reactor on their grid. So a rule of thumb that we use, I use this when I'm looking at emerging markets for nuclear, is you never want a single power plant to be more than 10% of the total capacity on the grid. So you need at least 10 gigawatts to accommodate a 1 gigawatt reactor. And there's just not a lot of areas that can accommodate that, really big cities around the US. But when you move towards smaller reactors, you can build nuclear in more places and also closer to where the demand is. So in smaller cities, smaller towns. And when you get to microreactors, you can start doing kind of municipal level ownership. So that really changes the markets that are open to nuclear. And then the other aspect is cost. So a 1 gigawatt reactor could be, upwards of $10 billion, and it's very few utilities that can afford that, to have that debt on their books. So moving down in size, even if the relative cost isn't much different, it just opens up new markets. And part of the reason for that rule of thumb of 10% is that what happens if the power plant needs to shut down, whether for maintenance or an emergency, suddenly having 10% of your grid down is a problem. So if you're much smaller reactors, it's easier to shut them off and balance that authority. So one thing that's you can do, and what NuScale is that 50, 60 megawatt reactor that's deployed in 6 or 12 packs, is that they've done some modeling and shown that their system actually works really well to balance higher penetrations of intermittent renewables like wind and solar on the grid, because they can ramp up and down, but they can also turn reactors on and off. And so they're much better able to match demand, but it also means they're a good partner for utilities and for municipalities that are looking to increase their renewables penetration. So good partnership. And that's really what markets are looking for right now is more flexible generation and more diversity in their generation.
Rachel, I want to put you on the spot a little bit because I want to turn back to ARPA-E, always my favorite subject, of course. You manage the Meitner program, you've launched the Gemini program. Tell us briefly about those programs and about what ARPA-E is doing on the R&D side, if you could.
Yeah, thanks. So Meitner was the first nuclear program out of ARPA-E, and it was recognizing that to get these next designs deployed, a lot of parts and pieces need to come together at once. So as a nuclear engineer, I write software about sort of the core, and that's the thing that everybody loves. It feels really exciting. The thing that makes reactors really expensive is all the other stuff. It's the concrete and the base mats and the pumps and the valves and the sensors and the construction timelines. So the Meitner program was really about enabling technologies, trying to develop things that would be helpful for a large collection of nuclear reactors, that whatever moves forward, they're going to need to be built more quickly. They're going to need certain sensors. They're going to need certain pieces and components. And so the idea of Meitner was really getting those ready now so that the whole system will be ready to deploy more quickly, with a real focus on construction time, sort of predictability and schedule, and being able to enable that high temperature and flexible operation so that you can have better grid integration. The Gemini program is really looking at what happens after you turn those systems on. So many of you probably know that existing reactors in certain markets are being shut down in the United States because their operations and maintenance costs are comparatively high. They have a really large staff. They're systems that have sort of old instrumentation. and it doesn't make sense in many cases to update to be able to take advantage of really new ideas about operations and maintenance that are happening in other industrial sectors. So predictive maintenance, asset performance maintenance, having a bunch of digitized sensors and digital data collection mechanisms and applying machine learning and doing really optimized strategies doesn't work in existing plants. And so the Gemina program is getting reactor designers to think about right now what their operations and maintenance paradigms will look like so that the strategies are developed, the tools and sensors are ready, and that if they need to make design changes, they do that before they get too far down the process and things are already demonstrated. And so that's really what Gemina is all about. And then we also have a small materials cohort. So materials in nuclear can be pretty tricky because they're in high temperature environments that sometimes are corrosive and always have radiation. So we have a couple of teams that are speeding up how you do research on materials so that you can get new materials identified and developed more quickly.
Great. So I want to switch gears and talk about people now and give the audience a sense of the community of innovators, entrepreneurs, investors, people who are pushing advanced nuclear forward. So I'm going to start with you, Rachel, again, because you've run a nuclear innovation boot camp at UC Berkeley for 5 years. I remember good old Berkeley Farms, and the slogan used to be "Farms in Berkeley, moo." And so this is like a nuclear boot camp in Berkeley. It actually is true. So anyway, that's just an aside. But you've run this and you have a pretty good feeling of what this community is like and how big it is and what they're excited about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. So in the last, at this point, 10 years, nuclear has really shifted. So 10 years ago, the idea of nuclear startups was not a big thing. There were one or two, and then sort of in between, oh geez, what year is it? In between like 2010 and 2015, this space started to come alive, and multiple companies were started with new ideas with private investment. And it became clear that if that was going to be successful, you needed a workforce to be ready to go work at startups. And so looking around in sort of the Bay Area, there are all kinds of startup boot camps and sort of innovation trainings here, and there wasn't really anything like that for nuclear. So that was the idea behind the boot camp, and little did we know people would just be really, really excited about it. So we bring students and young professionals from around the world, and actually last year it was in Paris, to come learn about what's going on in the sector and how to think about the things that you don't learn in school. So how do you think about idea generation and customer engagement and energy markets and international and regulatory policy, all that kind of stuff. And so we've found there's this whole collection of people really all across ages, but a lot of new people coming into nuclear are really excited about innovative ideas, and they're typically selecting nuclear for climate change. Like they care about making low carbon energy. And then you have sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of people who started their careers when nuclear was really exciting and then kind of went through some times when not a lot of change was happening. And now they're really excited to go like work on those ideas that they've been thinking about 40 years ago. So it's kind of across the spectrum, but it's very much a young and entrepreneurial sort of set of folks.
How, roughly speaking, how many nuclear startups are there in the US these days, just approximately?
Yeah, it depends on how you count. Sort of real companies, probably about 30 if you include fusion and like sort of lab efforts. It's more like 75.
Jessica, what's your perspective on like who's investing in these companies, either in the public or private sector? And also I want to get your take, because I know you've thought about this, about how advanced nuclear is perceived in the public, especially by environmental groups, especially in the context of decarbonization.
Yeah, so as Rachel said, there are, in various forms, kind of around 60 to 75 companies working on advanced reactor technologies of some sort. And what's unique in the last 5 to 10 years is that a lot of them are really acquiring a lot of private investment from venture capital, a lot of angel investors, and that's really different than in the past where it was mainly government investment in sort of a few very specific designs. Now you have sort of a lot of variety in what's being developed, including private companies working on fusion, which 10 years ago seems unthinkable. And there's really been a shift in how the government is spending on advanced nuclear, away from doing the actual, R&D, but also the development towards now. There's more money coming from DOE through programs like ARPA-E, but also through the national labs towards facilitating the commercialization process. So it's really driven by private companies, and they're getting help from the government in different ways to finalize their designs, get them to licensing, and work out some of the questions that they have around the technologies. But it's really more being driven by private companies now, and some of the efforts are moving pretty fast. So we have 2 companies that have submitted license applications to NRC, about 6 more that are working on pre-application activities. So things are moving towards commercialization. Now, how the public feels about them and how environmentalists feel about advanced nuclear, for a large part, people just don't know that much about advanced nuclear, particularly in traditional environmental spaces. There's been a lot of consensus in the last few years, even in environmental organizations, that the existing nuclear fleet is really important to air pollution, to climate change. We don't want existing nuclear power plants to close prematurely, because when they do, they get replaced by natural gas for the large part. So there's been some consensus there, but in terms of new builds, a little more uncertainty, because people aren't as familiar with what these new technologies look like. They're still thinking of this old paradigm of very large plants, very expensive, not a lot of say in where it gets built, not a lot of transparency. Whereas these new advanced reactor technologies are trying to do things very differently, but that really needs to get proven out. And we are seeing, some positive changes here. You see the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force put out their climate recommendations, and they had several mentions of advanced nuclear in particular. I did want to pull out the quote that I found. So there's a few places where they cite the need to invest in advanced nuclear that eliminates risks associated with conventional nuclear technology while ensuring environmental justice, ... So I think that's a really great way to focus it. Eliminating risks is a big ask, but I think that's what a lot of these startups are focused on. And I think what you're seeing a lot of this drive from particularly younger engineers, people coming out of grad school that are really passionate about climate change, really passionate about energy access in the developing world. They're the ones that have decided to focus on nuclear as a solution to that. And I think people can see that passion and that drive in these companies and are starting to take notice. And so it's being reflected in not just, Biden, who's, can be somewhat moderate, but even some of the people working on Green New Deal are starting to recognize that nuclear is currently important to America's power grid, but also is going to play an even larger role if we're serious about tackling climate change. So there's been some changing perception around nuclear because of these new technologies. Not just new technologies, but the people that are working on the technologies and the companies also are very different. And so we're seeing that reflected in how people feel about it.
Yeah,
so not much of a challenge. Just eliminate all risk, and also, by the way, take care of the waste problem too. That should. Rachel, you wanted to say something?
In this change, if you had told me 10 years ago that Y Combinator was going to fund a nuclear fission company, I would have looked at you like you were completely crazy. And go figure.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Jessica, it came up, you mentioned developing countries. Do you want to talk a little bit about how advanced nuclear might work in a developing country, what it offers and advantages, and why it might be a good solution there?
Yeah. So just to start off, to get something out of the way, developing countries have built nuclear in the past, and there's several examples of countries building nuclear power very early in their economic development and using it as sort of a driver of industrialization, urbanization. So it's not just for wealthy countries. And we're seeing this today there's about 30 countries around the world that are interested in starting commercial nuclear power programs, and they're working with the international regulator to kind of get their ducks in a row to do that. And I think, and I've done research around, particularly with Energy for Growth Hub, of is there a way that advanced nuclear can make it easier for these countries to have access to clean nuclear energy and in ways that make it more equitable. So how that could be is right now for a lot of these countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, their grids are just too small to accommodate a large light water reactor. Almost all of these countries are going to import their first reactor, whether it's from the US. Right now, Russia wants to be the big exporter for the developing world. Or China or South Korea. But advanced reactors, if you can offer something much smaller and modular that's maybe fabricated in the US or Europe and then shipped to these countries, that eliminates a lot of the challenges, the barriers to entry for nuclear in these places. They don't have to do a lot of the on-site construction, which is where a lot of the problems occur with going over budget and big delays in startup. So if you can do the fabrication in a centralized facility in a country that already has a lot of experience with not just building nuclear, but maintaining the safety and the security around those materials, I think that's a big one. Some of the other aspects of advanced nuclear that are attractive for different emerging economy contexts. One is a lot of these designs don't use water as a coolant, either primary or secondary. So that can be great for dry and arid regions or inland regions. Most nuclear power right now is on the coast or on a major river. So if you have a big city that's not close to water, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for fossil fuels too, because you need that water to make steam. But if you have a nuclear reactor that can create electricity without any water, that can be a huge boom for economies in some of these countries. And then there's also a lot of uses for that heat, not just electricity. So a lot of industry needs heat, things that are really important for growing economies at the start, like agricultural modernization. Fertilizer production takes a lot of heat, and it's something people don't think about, but that could be a huge boom if you have access to really cheap heat, which you would get from some of these advanced reactor concepts. So those are just some of them, but the big one is really factory fabrication and modularization. If you could buy a nuclear reactor and have it shipped to you the way you might a natural gas turbine, or solar panels or wind turbine, that would be huge for some of these countries. And when you start getting down to microreactors, the one Oklo, which submitted their application, it's 1.5 megawatts. That's the size of a modern wind turbine. So it's a very different paradigm of who can afford to buy nuclear and who can manage nuclear on their grid.
Certainly, the not having to co-locate with a water supply also has a safety issue, right?
Yeah.
Fukushima, right? And that's an important factor, especially with climate change continuing. So, okay, so the final topic is our challenges to adoption. And so we could have a whole session on this, but I didn't want to do that, so we're not going to have a whole session on this. But But I want to start again with you, Jessica. Sorry, I'm picking on you, but I want to come back to economics a little bit, and I want to talk about, you know, the economic competitiveness of advanced reactors envisioned versus, let's say, natural gas power plants. Right, natural gas power plants are now replacing coal, but in the future we could see maybe those being replaced by advanced nuclear reactors. How do they compete economically with natural gas?
Well, right now they don't compete economically, and that's why we're seeing a lot of nuclear plants close prematurely before the end of their life. And when they do close, they get replaced by natural gas, both in the US and Europe. And so that's really the target of really all of these companies, is how to be cost competitive with natural gas. And I know there's a lot of, in ARPA-E, a lot of targets around reducing the cost of nuclear with that sort of target in mind. So you know, NuScale has an aim of getting their levelized cost down to be competitive with natural gas. And we'll see. There's a lot of reasons they might get there, but it's going to be, the proof is in the pudding. We'll see when the first one gets built. But that's really the target. And so again, as I mentioned at the beginning, when you can reduce a lot of the complexity in the design, when you can do factory fabrication, it's just intuitive that costs could come down a lot. I mean, that's how we got costs down on wind turbines, on solar panels, was mass producing them in centralized facilities, really simplifying the design, streamlining operations to make it a lot simpler. So I think there is a lot of potential there, but there needs to be policies in place that spur demand, because that's how you actually get a lot of units built to bring those costs down. So it's not anything radical or revolutionary. It's a lot of the same policies we use to spur deployment of renewables, you know, production tax credits, clean energy standards, some maybe loan guarantees for building the first factories to fabricate the reactors, those sorts of things. But there's a lot of evidence that costs could come down if you actually are building them in a factory setting, but we have to see it to believe it.
Yeah, I don't know if Rachel, you want to comment on that, because I know ARPA's done, you know, they think a lot about cost, you know, to be competitive, and this is a classic case of the kind of apples versus oranges, right? You have R&D on the one hand, and you have models and estimates of costs versus something, natural gas turbines that have been on a learning curve for a long time, and we know what their costs are going to be. So it's really an apples and oranges comparison. But Rachel, I don't know if you had anything more to say about economics from the point of view of the kind of work that ARPA's been doing.
Yeah, I guess, so there are some studies that show that the capital costs for advanced reactors could be in line with targets that make some sense. There have been some bottoms up cost analyses doing that. And actually a report came out today that ARPA-E funded that looked at this combination of grid integration and cost that lays out what the maximum capital cost of an advanced reactor could be, both with storage that allows them to operate flexibly and without. And the target costs are in line with what people are shooting for. But again, it is this, things have to actually get demonstrated. And so that's in the next 5 years, we'll really learn a lot, because there are a lot of things that should get built in the next 5 years. And if they really do, we start to get some real data. And I can put a link to that report in the chat.
That would be great. I want to turn to the regulatory side, and that's going to be Jessica's bailiwick again, I think. But in this context, I also, and it's actually, I saw one of the Q&A questions come up with this, like, at what point do we need to like pick a design or a set of designs for advanced reactors, or do you think that the regulatory process and the economics can be flexible enough? So it's kind of an open-ended question. It gets into the regulatory stuff, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's a bad idea to pick a single design to move forward with, because we don't know. You know, a lot of this is we need to build actual plants and see the costs and see how they perform. And there's also just so much variety in the designs that companies are working on. I think we've seen some reforms on regulation or modernization of how nuclear is regulated in the last 5 years that is putting us on a path for a more efficient regulator. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done. But if you have a good regulator, it should be able to accommodate licensing a lot of different technologies and not having so much of a cost burden on the developers. And what I would like to see is a lot of different designs get licensed, because it's really, you want the market to be deciding what they want from a nuclear reactor. And that's some of the problems we've had in the past, is particularly the large reactors that we have existing today are just not a good fit with modern electricity markets. They're too big, all the cost is in the capital. And so that's what a lot of these developers are designing for, is they're trying to fit a market need or what the market's demanding. And so I think we kind of want to let them decide. Now, of course, we can't, there is going to need to be some government support at certain stages. That's going to be limited, but I think there's much smarter ways to do that. And one thing you can look towards is how NASA invested in stimulating the commercial spaceflight industry. So rather than spend $25 billion to develop a new space shuttle to get people and cargo to the International Space Station, to low Earth orbit, they seeded a lot of grants in private companies, and then also created this milestone system to fund any company that could reach certain targets of launching into space. People think a lot about SpaceX, but there are other companies that managed to get through those milestones with NASA as well. And so that really pushed a lot of diversity in designs, and also built out the commercial spaceflight industry, which is now doing a lot of private launch services. So that's one model that we can look towards of how to do this better, how to use government money more efficiently to stimulate the private sector rather than just pick one design and build it, which might get something built, but it might only get one thing built and maybe not the best thing for what actual markets want.
And how do you see the regulatory framework changing, right? I mean, that's been from my perspective at least, a major impediment, right? The NRC process is so burdensome and time consuming and expensive. There has to be some more flexibility while retaining all the good aspects of what we want regulation in place for nuclear, right?
Yeah, one of the big themes here is moving towards risk-informed regulation rather than overly prescriptive regulation. Like, you need to check these 100 items, some of which don't even apply to your design. So being more flexible in how they evaluate designs based on the actual risks, rather than a predefined list of checks. And that is getting developed. I think there's definitely more work needs to be done, but Oklo, the microreactor company that just submitted their license, they were piloting a new process because their design is not a light water reactor. It's a fast reactor. It doesn't have any water. It's very different. And so a lot of the regulations previously didn't really apply to them. And so they had to sort of forge their own path, but they try to prove the safety case as it's appropriate towards their technology. And we'll see, they are anticipating a faster approval process, something like 2 years. And we'll see how that goes. But if that goes well, I think a lot of companies are going to move down that path. And I think NRC is going to start to formalize and streamline this process for the next set of companies going through it.
So I wanted to come back to the safety aspect and really to the risk perception aspect. I mean, we mentioned it a little bit earlier about how we're trying to change the paradigm, the way people think about nuclear and approach it from the safety perspective or the risk perspective. What do you guys see has to happen in that, and how is that going to transpire? I mean, ultimately, if you can't convince the public that these things are safe and reliable, it won't happen. And so somehow there has to be some communication there and some transparency there that, frankly, the nuclear industry probably hasn't been very good at in the past. So I'm interested in your perspective and again, how the startups are approaching this, right? I mean, you're convincing investors and anybody else to put money into this, to believe in it. So they have to do some outreach, some education. How is that working?
That's a good question. I think some of it is, if you start with the design that actually can't have offsite consequences, then what you need to plan for and how you can communicate about that really changes. And it's not, so people, like there's a whole field about people and risk perception and what we perceive as risky and why. And it's like not a reasonable ask to think that we're going to have some like public education mission and all of a sudden humans are going to like have experience risk differently. Instead, we can make things that we have the ability to talk about risk differently, and we can do public engagement differently. So there's a collection of people who are looking at how do you do engagement in a socially informed way so that all of the stakeholders have a say, get their needs heard, get value for any risk that they're accruing, so that the people who get the biggest benefits are also, like anyone who experiences the risk also gets the biggest benefit and they understand why that is. So it's more adopting good social science and a little less expecting nuclear engineers to convince people to experience risk differently.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to people just need to get more familiar with the technology. They need to have more experience with it, but it's really critical that those experiences are positive. So I think building some of these first demonstrations in a safe place, whether it's Idaho National Labs or another federal facility, and then being really transparent about the process, letting people come and take tours, just having it be really open, and more of an educational experience where people can come and, get up close and see how it works and see that it's, very stable and secure, will go a long way. But then again, as Rachel first set of commercial builds, having them really want to host it, not having something be forced upon them, but small communities that are really excited to be on the cutting edge of new technology and that feel like they're really being compensated for for the small risk that they may be taking, but that they really understand and that they're in control of the process. I think will go a long way to changing how people feel about nuclear.
Rachel, you mentioned designs that had no, I get the exact expression, no external outcome. Can you tell us more? What's that?
Yeah. So it's like, if there's an accident,
right,
if something happens that is not what you were hoping to happen, you don't need an evacuation zone because nothing will happen outside of like the fence around the reactor. So the idea is, if there's a worst case scenario, nobody has to evacuate because nothing can happen that would actually affect the surrounding community.
And that's just because of the scale of the reactor, the particular fuel
because of the physics.
Design and the physics, right?
Yeah, because of the design and the physics. It's not that we're adding safety feature after safety feature after safety feature. It's that it just can't happen. So we have like research reactors right now that are designed so that they can't melt down. For example, like they just can't have an accident where they would melt down. So it's the idea that you can, because we've discovered that safety has so much cost, that if you get rid of the need for some of that safety by designing it into the physics of the system, you can get rid of some of the cost.
I just wanted to touch on, before we go to the Q&A session, waste, which is a problem no matter what the design of the reactor. Is there anything inherent in these designs for advanced reactors that helps on the waste side of things?
Jessica, do you want to go?
Yeah, it depends on the technology, and some of them some of these reactors are designed to run on recycled fuel. Some of them are designed to use fuel more efficiently or have higher burnup, so you're left with less waste at the end. But no matter what we do, we need to come up with some solution for the existing spent fuel that we have, whether that's recycling it or finding a permanent repository for it. So they can help on some ends, but it's also a political process of coming up with a solution.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed on the House Democrats' climate action plan, they were very gung-ho about advanced nuclear. Just solve that waste problem, like, eliminate risk and solve the waste problem, as we said. So,
yeah. And I said we've talked a lot about innovations for reactors, but there's also a lot of innovations and even some startups working on nuclear waste and different solutions for how to store nuclear waste. And so that's an exciting space too. If you are really interested in that, you can follow up.
All right, we're going to turn to Q&A because I see we've chewed up most of our hour already, as we're wont to do. Okay, so first question.
Can I add super quickly? I saw a lot of people were asking about waste.
Yes.
Just that there already exist technical solutions. Advanced reactors can help implement a fuller suite of technical solutions to be available. But the problems, it's not just a technology issue. It is, as Jessica said, it's political, it's social, and it's economic. So it's making sure that, advanced reactors can help with the technology piece.
Okay, so the first question from our audience, when talking about emerging markets or smaller countries, what kind of personnel training is required to go along with getting a reactor up and running there? And what do you see as the best initial markets for mid-sized advanced reactors once they're commercially available?
So there's a process. Human capacity is part of infrastructure review that IAEA does when looking at helping countries figure out if they're ready for new nuclear. You definitely need a good workforce, not just to work at the nuclear power plants, but also in your regulator, in your government. But that's one of the aspects for why advanced reactors might be helpful is if you're importing a reactor that maybe has very minimal staff, it might be a little easier. You don't need, 1,000 people on site when the plant's running. If it's more like a natural gas plant, which has maybe 6 people working on it at any one time, that's a lot easier for a country to implement. But some countries really want to build up their workforce in engineering, and so they may choose to do that anyway. And what was the best market? Was that the
other question was, kind of.
So some of the countries that are maybe closest are big countries with a lot of industry that are constrained on energy resources. So places like Jordan, Vietnam, several countries in Southeast Asia. Also places that have a lot of coastal access like Indonesia are really interested because they have a lot of cooling water, and places that have big cities. Traditional places where nuclear has done best have been islands like Japan, United Kingdom, where they don't have a lot of domestic fossil fuel reserves, and they have a lot of coastal access, and they can't import electricity the way like mainland Europe can. So yeah, and in other parts of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa is still a big market for new nuclear. They already have existing nuclear, but other places are Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, very interested as well.
So here's a question that I think I've asked you guys too, so I'm going to repeat it. It talks about the capital costs and long timelines associated with the construction of new nuclear plants, as well as mining and refinement of nuclear fuels. Is it actually more cost and time efficient to build new nuclear over a large volume of grid utility scale battery storage for renewables? So this is getting at we talked about how advanced nuclear could complement renewables on the grid, but in some sense it could be competing with renewables plus storage. So any thoughts on that? I know you when we discussed this earlier, you said, well, it's competing with natural gas. That's true now, but storage costs are coming way down, and ARPA-E, among others, have invested a lot of R&D funding in driving those storage costs further down. And Rachel talked about thermal storage, which, interestingly enough, in long-term storage is the biggest play that ARPA-E is making right now. So,
yeah, it's a complicated question. I think when you look at models that fully decarbonize the grid, so 100% low carbon, no fossil fuels, or including some fossil with CCS, it's just cheaper, faster to include nuclear. You can do it 100% renewables. It's just very hard. And the reason for that is that renewables tend to be geographically correlated. So when it's windy everywhere in the region. When it's sunny everywhere. And so you get these big booms of electricity at certain times. And even if batteries get a lot cheaper, it's still hard to manage sort of the seasonal variation, the weekly, monthly variation. And it results in a lot of overbuild. So if you are 100% renewables and batteries, you have to build out, 100 times the capacity in some cases. So that's the challenge. And then also fully electrifying transportation and industry is really hard to do with renewables as well. But you can, of course, have a lot more renewables, and I think we will. And cheap batteries help smooth that out. One thing that's, I think, interesting that people don't think about is when you do get really cheap storage, it can also really help the cost of nuclear, because nuclear can do some cost arbitrage. So if the price of electricity is really low, nuclear can charge its on-site batteries. And when the cost is really high, sort of during the evenings when there's a lot of demand for electricity, nuclear power plants can sell off their electricity from their batteries. So it's a dynamic system with everything interacting, and I think we're going to see it's going to take a mix. So we're going to have a lot more renewables, but I think nuclear can actually help increase the penetration of renewables if you have a good system set up.
And a quick point about the mining. Because nuclear fuel is so efficient, you don't actually need to do that much mining for a lot of nuclear electricity. And the plants themselves are also not, they don't take that many materials. So actually comparing the mining associated with batteries and renewables, it actually is more mining than an equivalent amount of nuclear by a substantial factor.
So we're just about out of time. I got one more question, which you probably won't want to answer. So who will be the first to build a modular advanced nuclear factory? Let's leave out NuScale because they're further along the line. That's too easy. Who else?
I mean, who the company? I guess we can't ask the person. Who the company or who the country?
Well, let's go with who the country, because that's I want to ask you to specify a particular company, because then you'd be endorsing them somehow, I guess. So
that's a good question. I mean, yeah. So NuScale is already, has their license application in. Oklo also has their license application in. So in the U.S., I think it's probably going to be one of them to build their factory, because Oklo is so small. It could be easier for them to build their factory. I mean, 1.5 megawatts fits in one or two shipping containers.
Do you think they have to build a physical device for testing before they can get licensed, or can they do it all in simulation and modeling?
Nope, they submitted their license application. They're looking to build their first plant to produce electricity. So outside of the US, I mean, China has a pair of modular high temperature gas cooled reactors under construction for a while now, almost ready to come online. So if they like that design, if it works well for them for industrial heat, they probably would start building more of them in a factory setting. So that's probably the first one.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time. There are 30 some odd more questions that we're not going to have time to get. So thank you so much, Rachel and Jessica, for this entertaining and thoroughly enjoyable discussion. Thanks to the Duke University Energy Initiative for hosting the event, and particularly for those who made it run so smoothly, Braden Wellborn, Stacy Peterson, and Jacob Bratch. Please see the chat for links for more information about staying connected with the Energy Initiative so you can hear about more events in the future like this one. You'll receive an email soon with a link to a survey about this event. Thanks in advance for your feedback. With that, we will close, and everyone stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks a lot.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.